Hello, today I would like to go over a modified graphic organizer that I use with my students who are alternately assessed when I'm addressing the Math Essential Element 3 NBT2, which is demonstrating an understanding of place values. So I was able to find this graphic organizer, which was really helpful because there's a space over here for some shapes that could be drawn in. There's boxes down here to add up the images or the drawings that we have. Then we have our number form and our word form. So I really liked this graphic organizer. It goes up to the thousands. You can obviously just use the tens and the ones, the hundreds, tens, and ones, whatever you need and whatever works best for your students, right? You can even crop it, take screenshots, right? I took this PDF and I put it into a Jamboard so that I was able to encourage my students' participation and their collaboration. So let's go through. I'm going to show you some different ways that I differentiated and scaffold this particular graphic organizer to meet the needs of various students. So let's go through. And the first thing I have here is I had some images already drawn out. Again, I know thousands is pretty high up there, but I'm just showing you all the options you have, different ways that you can provide some support. So say your students can't draw it in and you want to have those visuals there that we would typically be using as manipulatives in the classroom, you can absolutely do that, right? If your students need the whole image colored in, you can do that, right? If that stands out to them more, if that's more accessible or more something they'll orient towards better, you can absolutely do that. The other thing is you can move them around if you needed, right? So you can have all these things ready. And then as you're teaching, especially even in the beginning of your lesson, you're going to want to count through each of these objects with your students and then have them understand that the amount of objects that are in this box is exactly what you're going to be putting down here. Then once we have all the shapes added up and we have each of the numbers and the columns all over here, we're going to write out our number, right? So you can add a text box down here and you can write in 1468, right? So, and then you're like, oh, here's our number. And then you can write out your word if you want. You can show them how we are using place values, right? You can show them that each number means has a different column, right? There are ones, and this is specifically what the ones are. And so you can go through that way, right? So you can say, okay, we have 1 in the thousands column, so we're going to put a 1 down here. We have how many rectangles in the hundreds column? All right, that's why we have a 4, or you'll draw it as you're counting together, right? Here are 6 squares, so let's put our 6 down here. Now we have 8 ones, and we draw our 8 down here. We write it in, right? So as you're going through, you can then start to leave that open so that they understand, okay, so now my job is to count the shapes, right? You can take, like I said, you can take these shapes out, you can add them in, you can move them around, you can have your students call out the different numbers that they want to put in different columns, right? Have that engagement and that interactive participation. You can absolutely do that, and that is really fun, and then you know that you have your students motivated because they're really a part of the lesson, right? So you can change the colors, you can have them pick the colors, whatever works. But this was just an example of how you can provide some visuals within this graphic organizer using Jamboard. Again, using manipulatives is usually what allows us to have math be so hands-on, and this is a virtual way to do that, right? Because you can move things around, you can add, you can take them away, you can make different shapes and sizes, different colors. So I think that often helps capture our students' attention and keeps them cued into what it is we're talking about. So let's go through. Now, if your students are beyond just needing those visuals or those shapes, you can move on to something like this, where we would still have color coding, but we would leave it open. And this would still be a fully supported, right, one of the earlier or beginning level graphic organizers where I have all my numbers listed out. I have my standard form here, I have my word form, and then I have my columns also highlighted to cue them into what it is we're talking about. So now at this point, if your students are able to manipulate or have fine motor skills to draw in whatever shapes they want to draw in that would represent the thousands, the hundreds, the tens, and the ones, right? So you can have them draw, you can have them use this shape box, you can have your paras support them and draw for them or create the shapes for them. You can have students work in pairs or in groups or use a breakout room. So you can have one student who is identifying and drawing the ones. You can have other students using the shapes. They can take turns doing each of the columns. But this is, again, one way that you can decrease some of the supports and have your students actually show what they know. As you're doing a we do component of your lesson, you can have students identify the color they're going to use and draw in their shapes and go through the whole lesson and have one student for each column participate, right? So as we're moving along, say the students really get it, we want to fade back some of that support, right? We don't want to stay here forever because their goal is to eventually move on and do this independently. So a way that we would then take away some support would allow them then to draw their shapes and identify how many shapes they drew. So again, you can give them the cue down here of how many you want in each of your columns for the place value. You can write out the words because that is kind of challenging, right, for some of our students. You can also, as you're going through the lesson, have students call out numbers that they want to practice, right? So maybe they want to practice their age. They're going to go and they're going to say, let's do 8, let's do 7, you know, whatever it is. So you can work, we can do 7 and 8, right? Whichever way is fun and engaging and motivating for your students, right? You can put in their birthdays, they can put in all different things. So again, you would then fade from what we had over here where you had this number listed below, so you were cueing them in more to how many shapes they were going to draw in the tens column or the ones column. Now you're taking that away, you still have it, but you want them to identify a little easier. And I kept that color coding right so they could still cue into where they're drawing what, right? Because that's the point of the place value. So then we would move along, and if your students are readers, you might just want to have the word form, right? You might just want to have 68 or 468 or whatever it is, right? And so you can have that where they would then have to write in the number, write in their shapes, identify how many shapes they have in each column, right? You can get really fun and creative with the shapes. If you have students who are able to write out the actual word, you can just have your number in there. And this is, again, where I said you can have students take turns calling out. You can go around the classroom, having students ask each other different fun numbers, parts of their phone number, parts of their address, you know, get as fun and creative as you can and make it meaningful and engaging for them. So this is some ways that I broke down this graphic organizer. I find, again, because we're not in person and we don't have those manipulatives, those cubes, those blocks that we can utilize, this was a way that I found my students had fun by drawing in various shapes, you know, going in, making their circles, right, doing whatever it is that worked for them. I also, like I said, found it was really fun for everyone to take turns picking different numbers. And that is one way that I was able to get a lot of engagement and interaction, and it became very hands-on in a virtual way. So I hope this was helpful. I hope you can use this in your classroom, and I hope your students will learn how to use place value, and this will help support them.